I'll press got it. Okay.
Good. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our show. I am your host, Liz. I am joining you as usual from Central Virginia and the unceded lands of the Monacan Nation. And I am really glad that you are here with me. So, first off, just a reminder that my new book, Home to Her Walking the Transformative Path of the Sacred Feminine, is available for pre order now from Womancraft Publishing. This book is my love letter of sorts to the sacred feminine, and it represents many years of research into her traditions around the world, along with insights that I've learned from my guest on this show, and then my own personal insights and experience. So I love this book. I really love it. I love my publisher, and if it speaks to you at all, I would love for you to have it. You can order it at womancraftpublishing.com. If you order before September 22nd, I believe 2022, there's some fun freebies that we're giving away, which you can find out about on womancraftpublishing.com, and I'll put that in the show notes in case you forget. And now, on with the show. So it might be fair to say that I have a bit of an obsession with the Black Madonna. For those that don't know, this term refers to statues, paintings, and other icons, images of the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus with dark skin that you can find all around the world. Although most often when people refer to them, it seems like they're usually referring to those that are found in Europe, which began proliferating in the Middle Ages. And if you are a regular listener to the show, you might know that I've approached her, the Black Madonna, in discussion a few times before. Alessandra Belloni, who is a world-famous percussionist and author of Healing Journeys with the Black Madonna, joined me back in 2020 to discuss her extensive research into the statues and images that can be found throughout southern Italy. And then I also talked to the English poet Matt Osmond and artist Kate Walters about their chapbook of poems and art called The Black Madonna Song. And then most recently, I had a beautiful conversation with Dr. Christina Cleveland, author of God is a Black Woman, who talked to me about her pilgrimage to many Black Madonnas in France and how important it is that we embrace the darkness of the Madonna's skin, not just as a metaphor or a representative of holy darkness, but as actually black, which demands that we see the beauty and the power and the sacredness that is inherent in black skin. Well, there's so much to say and explore about the Black Madonna. I don't think we're going to exhaust this topic anytime soon, and I'm really excited to introduce my guest to you today, whose work I recently and rather fortuitously discovered. Stephanie Georgieff is an author, podcaster, and YouTube contributor whose content focuses on the divine feminine. She has spoken at numerous Christian community and anthroposophical conferences throughout North America and Europe for the last 2 decades. Her books include The Black Madonna, Mysterious Soul Companion, The Virgin of Guadalupe, Mysterious Messenger of Destiny, and the soon-to-be-published Divine Darkness, The Journey of Advent with the Black Madonna. You can hear her on the Black Madonna Speaks podcast, which is how I found her, and the Heart of the Black Madonna YouTube channel. She is currently serving with the International Fellowship of St. John in rural Bulgaria, working with at-risk Roma youth, and she is joining us from her home there today. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's my deep pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, and I have to tell you, I just really stumbled across your podcast. I was researching information about the Camino de Santiago de Compostela and walking that, and was just curious, I actually had a friend who was walking it, and she was sending me pictures of Mary, the Virgin Mary, from that path. And I was like, I wonder if there's like a specific connection between the Black Madonna and the Camino. And so I was just kind of putzing around on the internet trying to find it, and I found your podcast. And I have to say, as a podcaster, and you know this because you're a podcaster, perhaps you have the same reaction, you spend a lot of time producing your own podcast. So
Right.
prioritizing other people's podcasts is kind of hard for me because I feel like a
Yes,
lot of
it is.
my brain energy goes towards doing my own. But I started listening to yours while I was driving about town, and I got totally hooked. And then I was just listening to every episode back to back to back. So I just, in every episode, I was like, oh, I gotta get in touch with her. I gotta see if she's gonna want to talk to me. So I'm
Yeah.
extra excited that you're here.
Yeah. Well, there's so many ways to approach the Black Madonna, and you were just alluding to that in your opening.
Yeah.
And I always say there's no wrong way to approach the Black Madonna. But I feel that one of the unique ways that I approach the Black Madonna is looking at this connection between the Camino de Santiago de Compostela.
Yes.
And when I was first doing my research on that, this was in the infancy of the internet. And so there wasn't a whole lot of information on that. In fact, back then, the only information was the University of Dayton, Ohio Marian Library page. And so, of course, because that was it on the search, I looked there and they basically said that these images, the bulk of them, not all of them, but the bulk of them were carried back from the Holy Land with the Crusaders. And what I also noticed was that there were many of them that were placed all along the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. And so I was fascinated by that connection. And that's really why you found that connection on my podcast. But that's something I write on extensively. And I just find it an endless source of inspiration and also information.
I love that, and I want to come back to that, but maybe it. And I also want to go. I want to jump in and just talk about your spiritual background a little bit, because that's usually where I start with everybody. But before I go back to that, can you just tell listeners who maybe aren't familiar with the Camino de Santiago what it is? Yeah.
Well, this is an ancient pilgrim route, and in the Neolithic ages, there were different mystery centers throughout Europe. And what we're noticing is these mystery centers have been transformed into shrines and churches. And the pathway between these mystery centers was called the pathway of the stars. And there were several major routes that were traversed by the ancients. And the one in northern Spain, which we now call the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, is the way of St. James, of the way of the stars. And it's this really incredible pathway. It goes literally, the Camino is literally all over Europe. It's basically a map of the stars that's on the topography of Europe. But the main pathway is in northern Spain, and that's why they call it Compostela, which is the way of the stars. And people have been walking it since the beginning of people walking, but it became quite popular during the reconquest of Spain. And Charlemagne actually was praying to some Black Madonnas. And I'm not advocating doing this, but he attributed victory against the Muslims to these Black Madonnas that he was praying to up along the Camino, and rode all the way to Compostela, or Santiago de Compostela, which is a city near the coast in northwestern Galicia. And he basically went to the end of the road and threw a spear into the ocean, and then said, everybody needs to walk this walk. This is a pilgrimage route that needs to be walked. So that was in the 700s. And it became very, very popular in the 9th century through essentially the Reformation. They suffered a decrease in traffic during the plague for obvious reasons. And then it did rebound. But then during the Reformation, anything to do with pilgrimage and things like that was looked down upon. And it started becoming more popular probably in the 60s and 70s. There were a couple travel guides that came out then, and then it has really been quite the destination. Millions of people walk this, and sometimes they do the whole thing, other times they do little parts of it. But it's a very transformative journey. And again, there's major routes. There's a route through Portugal, there's a route through France, there's several routes in Spain, but the main one is the northern route, which is in that whole area up in northern Spain.
Yes, the Camino del Norte, right? Isn't that what people refer to it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm so fascinated by this now that I've been reading about it. Even and I'm sure you know this, but even the Black Madonna of Montserrat, which is in Barcelona,
Mhm.
there is a route that's not very well known that goes from her
Yes.
to Santiago as well, right? It's not one of the more popular ones, but yeah, and I think it's quite rugged. But
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, around the shrine of Montserrat, which is the biggie Black Madonna of Spain. There are numerous Black Madonnas in Spain, but that's probably the most famous one. But it's really interesting around the shrine. It's paved. The Camino is paved
oh
in that
wow,
area. And I always say I've walked 30 meters of the Camino. So maybe you and I will be walking it at some point together.
yeah,
But it was interesting walking on there because it's absolutely breathtaking country. And people are literally crawling along that, as I guess that's their way of penance. It's not like they're handicapped and not able to walk, but it's really interesting to watch people in devotion go along the Camino. And like you said, that's not a well-known path, but it is recognized as that.
wow, wow. Oh, so many bucket list places. Well,
Yeah,
I know it's funny, right? Like my bucket list is full of pilgrimages.
I
I
know.
like, yeah, no, I don't want to jump out of an airplane or anything. I want to go on pilgrimage to all these sacred sites all over the world.
Oh,
That's what I want to do.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
now that I'm living in Europe, it's difficult with modern life and modern responsibilities to take 2 months off to
Oh
walk
yeah.
Pyrenees. But it's like, oh, but I'm like so close. I can just do a week here and a week there, and it's totally fine. Someday I would
Yes.
like to do the whole thing, but it's just yeah, it's very special. And the people that I was supposed to go on the Camino, I was supposed to actually lead a tour in 2019, and my father became ill, and so I had to not do that. But people that I have talked to that have gone on the Camino, they will say that when they're on the route, there's just this different energy. And if you go off the route, even if it's like in the mountains and you just walk off the path, you can feel a totally different experience, which to me shows this really interesting resonance. I always find that adoration and reverence from humans alters things.
Mm.
And if you've been around certain Black Madonnas, and I say this in one of my books, when I saw the Black Madonna of Czestochowa, I was like, is it her? Is it this image, or is it this reverence and love that we project onto this image? Because it's like walking into warm velvet. It's just
Oh,
incredible.
yeah.
The feelings of the energy in these sacred places that have these Black Madonnas, there is definitely a different feel that I do not experience. And I'm not saying one is better than the other,
Yeah.
but I've seen, different incredible images like the Pietà and uh, different works by Da Vinci and other things that are just amazing. But I do not get the sensations and the heartfelt sense and experience that I do when I'm in the presence of these Black Madonnas in these shrines. It's
Yeah.
truly remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Pietà, for those who may not know, that's a statue in the Saint. Wait, what's the basilica in Rome? St. Peter's.
St. Peter's, yeah,
Yeah,
St. Peter's.
St. Peter's Basilica of Mary holding Jesus after he's been crucified. It's quite sad, but
Yes,
yes, and was it who carved that? Was it
Michelangelo.
Michelangelo? Okay, that's what I thought. Um, Yeah, but I hear that. Huh. And I wonder, as you were saying that, I wanted to say, is it her or is it the devotion? I just wanted to say, yes, it's both.
Yes.
It's all.
Both. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Who knows? But it feels like, but yes, like it's all of that and more.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Well, I had a feeling this was going to be an easy to jump into conversation, but I'd love to go back a little bit and just get some of um, your spiritual background. Like, how were you raised, and what were you introduced to as a child, and how did that kind of shape your interest as an adult now?
Well, I have you ever seen the T-shirt of adult children of normal parents? There's two people in the audience.
Oh, you were. I've heard being
I'm one of those people.
being you were cursed with a functional family.
I wouldn't say it was totally functional, but my parents were really delightful human beings, and my mother was a Southern Baptist, and her people were from Virginia.
Which is where I
And
am now.
yes, that's
Mm-hmm.
right, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was first generation Slavic Macedonian, and he was raised as an Eastern Orthodox. You know, they call it Macedonian Orthodox, but Eastern Orthodox. And they came together and both felt that faith was very important to a family. So, for some unknown and wonderful reason, they decided to become Methodists. But my mother or my father still maintained his Orthodox traditions. So in my household, the running commentary when people would visit was there's a Methodist book of discipline next to an icon of Mary, and
Wow.
and so we celebrated. To me, it was like cool, two Christmases and two Easters, and so I was raised, in the Methodist tradition, which was they're very much struggling right now, but it was a tradition of an open table, which meant that anybody that wanted communion could have communion, and your experience of the divine was your experience, and your experience informed you, and also this strong commitment to social justice as an act of faith. And then my father, his tradition was this Eastern Orthodox tradition, and there's a lot of mysticism involved in that tradition. So I always say I'm a practical mystic,
Mm.
and always was very comfortable with the Christ. I went to a Missouri Synod high school, a junior high and high school, which was not like how I was raised. And they were very patriarchal and what we would call literal in terms of their Bible translations, um, and was really thrust into this environment that I didn't understand. It just wasn't how I was raised. But the benefit of that tradition was it caused me to question and to go. Literally, as a 12-year-old, I was walking through the aisles of the library in Santa Ana, California, and I was talking to my pastor and all kinds of things like, how can this be true? They're telling us about hell and that all the Catholics were wrong and on it. I'm like, but my best friends are Catholic. What do you mean they're going to go to hell and all this other stuff?
Yeah.
And so it gave me a really strong background in Bible study, but it also pushed me into the library. And what I started doing as a young girl was seeing all these different incredible approaches to Christianity that were equally valid and amazing. And so I started exploring all sorts of different things: Catholicism, Druidism, Native American spirituality, and also came of age mostly in the New Age movement, which I found very interesting and valid, but never felt that any one thing had all what I would consider answers. Felt that they were all very beneficial and useful, and maybe some people would say I'm a cafe spiritual person. It's like, I'll take that for dessert and that for, an appetizer. No, I don't like that. Okay, fine, whatever. But that's really how I was raised. And then when I was in naturopathic school, I was exposed to anthroposophical medicine. And anthroposophy, the word, which you always say is very difficult.
I credit you for teaching me how to say it. I'm very excited that I can now say anthroposophy. So thank you for that.
You can now wear a t-shirt proudly.
That's right.
And the medicine is really interesting. And the word means wisdom of humanity. That's what the word means. And I was trying to learn the medicine, and it was like, this is way too complicated for me. I think I need to understand the philosophy before I can embrace the medicine. And so I started learning the philosophy and was very much enriched and nourished by anthroposophy's approach to Christ. And just find it a never-ending journey of amazingness, and especially because the philosophy builds on the Hebrew tradition and the Chaldean tradition and the Druid tradition and the Greek and the Hindu and Buddhist and all of these different traditions, and the philosophy weaves them together. And in my opinion, and again, this is my opinion, I think all approaches to Christianity are valid. As long as they're not oppressing and murdering people, they're completely valid. And but I find this one the most satisfying, and I just find it incredibly satisfying. So that's my spiritual background.
Yeah, and I just want to drop this in here because I was thinking about it. I do find it interesting. Obviously, this is a podcast on the divine feminine, the sacred feminine, so we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about Jesus or Christ, but I have found it really interesting that other traditions have found a way to embrace Christ. Like, for example, years ago I read the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, and he talked about seeing Christ as an avatar of the divine, and like there were pictures of Christ. I don't know. I haven't been to the Self-Realization Fellowship ever in Encinitas, but there's pictures of Jesus hanging up there with his own guru, Babaji, I think, and then. Yeah, and then certainly there's a whole New Age movement that has embraced Christ as well, and this idea of Christ consciousness, which you see in the Unity Church, which really is, completely different than what I grew up with. So I find that very fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to talk to you about the divine feminine too, and specifically. And I always like to ask guests, like, what language do you like to use? First of all, I use the sacred feminine, but you feel free to use whatever language works for you.
Sacred feminine's fine with me.
Yeah. And who is she to you, and how did she become a part of your life and kind of enter your perspective? I would imagine with an Eastern Orthodox father, you had some exposure to her early on.
Yes. Yeah, like I said, there are icons of Mary, and that certainly is not in the Protestant tradition at all, other than Christmas cards. No, how I started embracing the divine feminine, the sacred feminine, was in my training as a physician, and trying to me, nature is divine manifest, it's spirit manifest. And how I started seeing this is, what is the feminine participation in creation, from the plants all the way up through animals and humans? And something that is definitely part of the Eastern Orthodox tradition is the divine Sophia. And this is very biblical. And I've had, workshops where I'll start reading divine Sophia literature in the Bible, and people are just blown away. Like, that's in the Bible? It's like, yep. And this concept of a being that was the first of all creation. And that, in the Christian tradition, we hear of the Logos, the divine word. And it's this divine catalyst of creation, but you can't create anything unless you have a matrix for the creation. And so this creative being created the divine feminine, the divine Sophia, that allowed the matrix for the logos to manifest. And we see this in the world, especially in the earth, this divine, life-giving energy of the sun just zooms past the planet. And in order to capture that, the planet created an atmosphere. So we have an atmosphere that actually traps and manifests sunlight into this incredible creation. And I see that also in plants, in the chloroplasts, those little green things that transform sunlight into energy that we take into our bodies. And so there's this dance in creation between this impulse, this creative impulse, and then something to capture it so that it can manifest. And that's how I see the dance between the Logos and the Christ and the divine Sophia. Just this really interesting, like lemniscate going back and forth and back and forth. And we, in actually the Eastern Orthodox tradition, and there's a philosopher called Valentin Tomberg, who's a Russian. He really talks a lot about the divine Sophia, and that there's a trinity. There's the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, the masculine trinity, and then the feminine, which is Sophia, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and then Holy Soul. So there's these parallel trinities. And you have to, you look at this, in most traditions. The one I'm most familiar with is in Taoism, the yin and the yang. You can't have one without the other. And we've been through this very long cycle of just witnessing and, proclaiming one aspect of this balance, which is the divine masculine. But you really can't have this divine masculine unless you have the feminine. So that's how I relate to that. And those dual trinities I find really fascinating. And the fact that Mary, as a person, as a being, but also as a symbol of this earthly expression of the divine Sophia, I find very nourishing. And it's something that I can comprehend.
So many things were popping in my head as you're talking. One is, one of your, I think it might have been your most recent, well, for me, we're recording this in August 2022. But one of your most recent podcasts about Our Lady of Kabeho,
Yes,
in Rwanda,
yes.
who identifies herself as the mother of the word. Like there's an apparition, who comes to a young girl, which often these apparitions of Mary show up to children,
Yes.
or young people, and identifies herself as the mother of the word. I am mother of the word, which is so powerful to me.
Isn't it? It's so like, wow. It's one of those things where you learn what I do is I'll learn or read, and it's like, okay, I need to like walk around the block several times to like process this. It's wow. So yeah.
I've always felt like that about even the Rosary prayer. Holy Mary, Mother of God. Like, what is Mother of God? Whoa, let's just stop for a second and contemplate what that means, because that's so big.
It is. It really is.
Yeah. The other thing that came to mind, and I'm curious if you have a reaction to this, but I was thinking of, I had on the podcast a while back, Dr. Kavita Chennaiyan, who has studied, she's coming at the divine feminine from more of an Hindu place and from a Tantra place. And so she talked to me about Shiva being pure, undifferentiated awareness, just like, just
Yeah.
just pure it has no power. Shiva
Right.
has no power to act in the world without Shakti.
Right.
Shakti is his power to show up and to move in the world. And so I wonder if that's kind of what I thought about when you were talking
Yeah.
about the sun and the atmosphere and Sophia. Do you agree with
Oh,
that?
yes. You
Okay.
know, they like I said, this image from the scientific way is this radiant energy of the sun, which is such a creative energy that's just flying by.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute, we need to like capture this. And so it is spontaneous. That's what's so fascinating from the materialistic scientific understanding of of the evolution of our planet, that all of a sudden, poof, atmosphere. And it's
Wow.
like, wow. And obviously, as a person of faith, I see that as spirit manifesting.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. And yeah, you know, you have this Shiva and the Shakti energy, and each one individually is incredible,
Yeah.
but they only active when they meet and they cooperate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Super interesting. I have a Facebook group, so if you listeners are on Facebook, come and join us. It's called Home to Her. But I've also had some Hindu members of the group who have repeatedly pointed out, because the group is dedicated to the sacred feminine, and it's all
Right,
about
right.
reclaiming that wisdom that I think in the West, in the United States,
Mm,
certainly certain parts of Europe, depending on how you were raised, has been really oppressed.
right.
Um, but they've been really clear in saying, look, um, Shakti does nothing without Shiva. Like they always go
Exactly.
together. They
Yes.
are together.
Mhm.
And I've always found that kind of helpful to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we're in this really fascinating cycle right now where I always say we've done a bang up job on patriarchy. Yay.
We
And
did,
now
man. We've nailed it.
we just nailed that. And and now we need to, you know, rise the feminine
Yeah.
to balance that out. And I think that's why people such as yourself and all of these authors and this really, like I say, when I started doing my initial research, it was in the early 2000s, and there was hardly any information. And now if you Google Black Madonna, it's like
Yeah.
and this people embracing the rosary, and a lot of the Protestant religions are really exploring the Virgin Mary. And back in the 90s, when I was really, you know, a woman coming of age, there was huge debates and like almost like medieval um, arguments in church conferences at the World Council of Churches. They had some service to the Divine Sophia, and everybody got up and left, and on and on. And it's, I mean, and the verb, the words that were uttered, I'm like, is this like a witch trial from the 1700s? I mean, I couldn't believe what people were saying, but it's so interesting. This, you know, this emergent, incredible, beautiful, creative, loving, encompassing energy that, you know, it sets people off. But now it's becoming more what I would consider mainstream. At least people aren't flipping out if you mention something to do with the Virgin Mary.
Oh
So
yeah.
I think it's just part of the culture healing itself. That's how I see it.
Mm. Well, and let's talk a bit about the Black Madonna and your interest in her. And I mean, you've done a lot of scholarship in this area, and so I would imagine like trying to wrap our arms around that into a concentrated podcast is quite challenging. So, but maybe whatever feels like you know
Yeah.
you want to bring forward here, but you know, kind of who she is and yeah, why do you think she's called you and yeah.
It's interesting because I'm trained as a physician. You know, essentially, I'm a scientist. So I approach everything like that, and I'm endlessly curious. And I was doing a certificate course in culture and spirituality through Holy Names it's now university. When I was there, it was Holy Names College. And it was called the Sophia Institute, interestingly enough. And one of our modules was always on the divine feminine, sacred feminine. And so we had all sorts of interesting lecturers and assignments. And that for that module, we had a woman called China Galland who wrote the book Longing for Darkness. And
Yes, such a good book. Oh, I'm so glad
yes,
you mentioned that. Yes.
yes. It's just a primer. Everybody needs to get that book. It's like if you want to
Yes.
start, and what's interesting about it is she combines, as you said, she was looking for the connection between Kali and the Black Madonna. And so we had this weekend and she came and she had all these pictures of Black Madonnas. And this was in 2001. So it's a long time ago. It's amazing to me. That's a long time ago, but 2001, 2002, something like that. And she had all these pictures of Black Madonnas. And we were supposed to pick up a picture and meditate on it and see what it was saying to us. And I'm not very good at that kind of stuff. I respect it. I think it's very real, but for me, it's not always that good or effective, I think is a better term. And so I was looking at this picture as the Virgin of Montserrat. And what I heard was, stop making me into who you think I am. I am that I am. And I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty interesting. And then I went on this incredible journey. And I call it the never ending story. It never ends.
Wow. Well, and I
And
wanted to say really quickly, I am that I am isn't that what God told
yes,
Moses? Right now.
Moses,
Yes,
yes,
like with the burning bush, he said that's his name. I am that I am. Wow.
I am
Okay.
that I am.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's really interesting. That's so interesting. And so I just started this. And for me, what the Black Madonna is this incredible connector. This is how I see the Black Madonna. I see the Black Madonna in many, many different ways. One is that the Black Madonna is a connector between heaven and earth. And the Black Madonna is the Madonna of transformation. And I also see the Madonna, the way I have looked at the Black Madonna, she's this incredible invitation to explore ancient Christianity. And ancient Christianity is very different than what we have now, because right after the incarnation, humanity was like, what just happened? It's like, what just happened? And there was this felt sense of what happened, but they couldn't, you say, can wrap your arms around. It's like we couldn't wrap it around. And so there's all these really fascinating theories about what just happened. And the Black Madonna is really part of that. And I also see the Black Madonna as a counter to the negative things that have happened throughout history. And, to me, when you look at the evolution of our modern culture and you look at different events that have happened during that time, and then you see the flourishing of a certain type of art, a certain, counter movement. And she's always been a counter to the materialization and, in my opinion, suffocation of the Christ impulse. And it's always interesting when you look at the thing that I find the most fascinating about the Black Madonnas, as opposed to quote unquote white Madonnas, is the white Madonnas are always attributed to artists. It's Giotto or Raphael or Michelangelo or whoever. Amazing people, beautiful art, incredibly full of symbolism, etc. But when you look at the Black Madonnas, there's no artist associated with them. There
That's so
isn't.
true.
And if there is, it's the evangelist Luke, who wrote the Luke Gospel and the Acts of the Apostles. And there's scholars that will argue with me on that. But That's my story. But anyways, and there's icons of Luke painting, in my opinion, a Black Madonna. And there's whole genres of these Black Madonnas throughout Europe that are attributed to St. Luke, including the Black Madonna of Czestochowa, including the Black Madonna of Montserrat. All these different Black Madonnas are said to either have been painted or sculpted by the evangelist Luke. Well, the evangelist Luke's gospel is the one that circles the women in Christ's life, which I find really interesting. And then there was this, incredible impulse of Christianity, which in my opinion was the original intent. It wasn't to create an institution, it was to create a movement of the awareness of the intimacy between divinity and humanity. And it was co-opted as a political tool, essentially starting with Constantine. And, especially in the Orthodox tradition, Constantine is, he's the one that, legalized Christianity. He essentially knew that Christianity was the current mystery tradition for the evolution of humanity. And he wanted to make sure that Rome survived that. And so he basically Romanized Christianity in terms of ancient Roman hierarchy and infrastructure, and essentially choked Christianity. And it's a miracle that anything lovely got through, which it has. But when he was doing that, and when it became quite the thing, especially in the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries, the Black Madonna along the Camino de Santiago de Compostela was flourishing as an alternative to the Roman Church. And that's, to me, incredibly significant. It's incredibly significant. So to me, the Black Madonna, it can represent anything you want it to. I mean, really, whatever resonates with you. But to me, it's the spiritual world calling to us, saying, okay, there's all this stuff going on, and there's this prevailing theories and on, but there's this deeper quality, this intimacy, and this connection that the Black Madonna has with the interior of the earth and the heavens. And that's, to me, what she represents.
Wow. I also think it's really interesting that I didn't know the St. Luke connection until, I listened to your podcast, but that she is also so many, and Alessandra Belloni writes about this in her book, that there's so many of these statues. There's like this mystery around them, like they washed up on shore from somewhere, or they were found in the woods and carried in, and so that whole like earth connection, and like I'm just thinking of something that exists completely outside of hierarchy and patriarchal tradition.
Exactly.
Like she comes from this place that we don't know, like we cannot know for certain in that sort of framework.
Right.
And I find that really, really fascinating too.
Yeah, that is also, and to me, in the anthroposophical understanding, particularly in medicine, they use art as a therapy, and the color black signifies cosmic will transforming through human will. And in order to complete the Camino, it's a lot of will. And the Camino is also a path of modern initiation. And it is a very difficult modern initiation. Modern life is hugely difficult. Yes, we have technology and we have running water and all these neat things, but existing right now is really difficult. And it takes a lot of will to endure this. And to me, these narratives, they're all discovery stories. That's what I find so fascinating about the Black Madonna. It's exactly what you say. They find them, there's a cow that stands on a mound and won't move. And finally they see an image of a Black Madonna and they're like, okay, we've got to dig. And they dig and they find this thing. They'll find them in caves. They wash up
Yes.
on the shore. And the other thing is, of course, a lot of the literature is Catholic. They survived the Protestants. So like a church will burn down and the Black Madonna is still there,
Yes.
and they'll be chopped up in pieces and then they mend. Um, they don't want to move. And to me, and another motif that I work with is that in art, the Madonna is the image of the human soul and the capacity of the human soul. So this combination of dark color and these stories of resonance shows that the spiritual world is telling us that you can do this. You will be able to endure this. You will be broken, but you will be mended. You can be buried, but you will be discovered. You'll sink in a boat and you'll wash up on shore. And I think those motifs right now are so important as we are living through unprecedented times.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I always like to mention, and I think this woman that you interviewed, that I want to read her book as well, When God Was a Black Woman, what is so powerful to me, especially when they started appearing and they started becoming very much venerated in the 9th century. This was the beginning in the West of the seeds of racism and the seeds of colonialism, et cetera. And it is so important that divinity is seen as dark and not as, Caucasian. And
Right.
so I find these images very healing to all people. They're healing to people with light skin because they get to see divinity as dark, that it's not always light skin. Divinity is light skin, it's yellow skin and red skin and brown skin. I mean, divinity is every color you can imagine,
Yeah.
but it's important for people who are not dark skinned to see divinity presented that way.
Oh, yeah.
And then what has always touched me when I do my Black Madonna, as well as my Guadalupe lectures, you know, people who are brown skinned literally come with tears in their eyes saying, I never saw a Madonna that looked like me.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful because that never enters my mind.
Right.
And it's so painful,
Yes.
this pain of racism. And so you have this Black Madonna coming up at the big, in the years before the quote unquote age of discovery, when the planet was decimated with all this horrible conquest and enslavement and colonization. And yet you have this image saying, no, these beings are divine. So I see it in that way as well.
Yes, I'm so glad you named that. And I think Christina spoke to that too, of this importance that everybody sees divinity with black skin, and how that translates to our lives, like
Right,
all of us. Like we
right.
need to see, um, we need to be able to see divinity in ourselves. We really
Mhm.
do. We need to know the
Yeah,
divinity in ourselves. And if we're only given a picture, in my case, of like a super gentle white man, which is the only image I ever saw growing up,
right.
you wonder where
Exactly.
you are in that. And I
Exactly.
think that's, and Christina actually spoke to this on the podcast. I think that's doubly compounded by the fact that
Mhm.
she's a black girl growing up in a very Christian church where there's this
Right,
white man. And,
right,
like, yeah, it's a double whammy there.
right.
The other thing I wanted to say, and I think Alessandra has written about this too, and I wonder just your perspective on this, but from a very, just from a historical, like what was happening, um, I, I, I think Alessandra would say that, these goddesses, at least Southern Italy, the Black Madonnas, they are black because there was migration upward from Africa. So
Mhm.
I wonder how you feel about that. Like, there's theories that, some of them represent Isis and Horus, for example,
Mhm.
or other African goddesses. Yemaya,
Right,
this connection to Stella Maris, the Madonna,
right,
Lady of the Sea, and
right.
Yemaya, who was this, goddess of the sea from Africa. That
Yeah.
there was that migration upwards too, and
Yes.
people embracing her. So I
Mhm.
wonder how you see those connections as well.
Oh, I think they're completely valid.
Yeah.
And something, one of the books in the line, there's like a book a year, hopefully, but one of the books, which I find just endlessly fascinating, I call it Wisdom from the South, was that the original Christian communities, the organized, civilized Christian communities, were in Africa. And some of the first missionaries into Europe were from Africa, Northern Africa, and they brought their art with them. And yes, there were Isis statues, and how I see that, and again, this is my interpretation, is this evolution of the mysteries. And it's the evolution of our orientation towards the divine mother and the divine feminine and the sacred feminine, is this transformation of Isis into Mary and Sophia. Actually, Sophia was first, but there's this Isis. And what's interesting is, the myths of Isis is she has her hands up. And what she says, and the Horus myth is, he gets Osiris, excuse me. Osiris gets chopped up and he's all over the heavens, and she's gathering him and puts him back together. And that is an ancient way of how humans were getting their wisdom, was from the heavens. And then the wisdom came to earth, the cosmic wisdom came to earth. And when you look at these Black Madonnas, something that I find really fascinating, especially about the statues, is they have humongous hands. Yes. Like the hands are essentially the size of, from our forearms, if they were to scale, but their hands are down. And so I see this as a transformation of the mysteries of collecting wisdom from the heavens and bringing it down to earth through the human. That's basically what we're doing, is we're transforming cosmic wisdom through our will, and our agent of will is our hands and our feet, and we bring it down to earth. So I see them definitely. Yes, some of these statues, it's like, yeah, that's Isis. That's definitely Isis. But there are also these statues that are inspired, but they also, to me, they symbolize the transformation of the mysteries and this influence of the Christ impulse from Africa, this wisdom coming from Africa, that is really profound and very unknown to us in Western Christian tradition. Egypt, a lot of the church fathers that we hear about all the time, they were Black. Augustine was Black. I mean, St. Augustine, this is a formation of a monastic movement, was a Black guy. And a lot of very fascinating literature in these first 3 centuries of Christianity was all from North Africa, down to Central Africa. And we owe our African brothers and sisters and cultures an enormous debt. And to me, the Black Madonnas are hearkening to that, this ancient wisdom coming to us, and for us to transform that wisdom.
I love that. I almost feel funny asking you this question, but I want to ask it anyways. Since it sounds wrong, it's going to come out wrong. But I'm like, do you have a favorite Black Madonna? We love her, but like, are there? Is it the Montserrat, since that one came to you? Or
honestly, it's Montserrat. Okay. I just love that Madonna. I love all of them, but I just love her because she has this Mona Lisa smile.
She does. I just love it.
Yeah. And she, she's very Byzantine in her presentation. I love her origin story. It's for those of you who don't know, she was carved by St. Luke and made her way into Europe through, I think it was St. Helen of the Cross, and then was given to various royal families and made her way to Barcelona. And then when the Arab incursions started coming, they hid a lot of these Black Madonnas, like in the 6th and 7th century. So she was hidden in a cave, in these mountains. Montserrat means sawtooth mountain. And so she was hidden in this cave. And I always say that the church archivists weren't very good, in the 7th and 8th century. So people they couldn't figure out where she went. And then sometime in the 800s, and the dates are all over the place, but in the 800s, children saw, and shepherds, actually children of shepherds, saw this light coming out from the top of the mountain and heard this angelic music. And they witnessed this several times. And then they told their parents, and their parents witnessed it. And then they went to a local priest, and he witnessed it. And he went to the bishop and said, "You got to come. We've got a miracle happening down here." And so the bishop came, and then they had a search party, and they followed the beam of light and the sound of music. And then they found this cave where this image was sitting. And that's, part of the Camino walk. And the shrine where she is where this all discovered. And I just love that it's like the Luke Christmas story, the shepherds tending their sheep at night, and that she was discovered in this cave, like the cave that the Christ child was in. And but I don't know what I like more, the presentation or the story. I love the story. So I think she really is my favorite, but I like them all. They're all, as you're hearing on my podcast, they're just endlessly interesting stories.
They really are. Yes.
It's so fascinating. And they're all, to me, very symbolic of the human journey of the soul, basically. Is what I get out of them. Yeah.
I love that. Well, I think I have one final question for you,
Sure.
which would be, so obviously people want to know, if you want to know about the Black Madonna, right, you can listen to Stephanie's podcast. She's written about her extensively too, but like how might otherwise, would you suggest people meditate on an image, or like, if you're really trying to deepen, I would say from a heartfelt sense as well as like an intellectual sense, like what might you suggest to people who really are feeling called to know her more?
There's I think if you want to just see pictures of all of these, it's called the Interfaith Mary page.
Yes.
And I've contributed to that page, and then the pandemic happened and all sorts of things happened. But Ella Rosette is the one that originated this site. And what she has is so interesting. She has a global map, and you can click on the little dots. And she also has what's called a gallery, and it's arranged by country. And so you can go and you can just look at these different images and see which one calls out to you. And then I would recommend, looking at the image, or, like I said, the art now is incredible. There are many modern artists that are doing incredible work, just incredible work. On the Black Madonna. So you don't necessarily have to have these quote unquote traditional Black Madonnas. You can find amazing pictures from modern artists. And I would meditate on it and see what it says to you. And the stories are fascinating. There's it's the Cult of the Black Virgin by Ian Begg.
Yes.
He has a lot of really interesting narrative stories on the different Black Madonnas. And then on the Interfaith Mary page, she has really nice write-ups. I draw from her, but I also supplement from this site, but it's a really good beginning. And I mean, it's you know, it's what's I like about the Black Madonnas. You can do it any way you want. I mean, there's whatever reaches you. I mean, if you like an intellectual study, there's tons of information out there. If you want more of a soul experience, there's incredible artists that are working with this. And there's interesting prayers associated with the different Black Madonnas, which are really sweet. So there's just many ways, but those are my like three go-tos, you know, the Interfaith Mary page, Longing for Darkness by China Gallen, and then The Cult of the Black Virgin by Ian Begg. And then this book that you interviewed the author, that I think is incredible. She has a lot of information and ideas for rituals surrounding Black Madonnas on that. And I think, and then When God Was a Black Woman, I think is also really a powerful.
And I will make sure I put all this in the show notes too, because we talked about a lot. So if you heard something and you couldn't write it down, not to worry. You can find it on the website for the show. Wow, Stephanie, thank you so much. I am so grateful. If you're watching this, it's getting dark where Stephanie is, which means
Yes.
it's time to let her go.
Yeah,
Time difference.
I know I was trying to figure out how do I do this, and then I'm like, oh, I forgot to light a candle. I should have lit a candle, but that's okay. Yeah, it's getting dark here. Yeah.
Well, I'm so grateful for your time. Really happy to know you, and thank you so much for your work. It's wonderful.
It's my pleasure, and I'm sure we'll be following each other for quite a while. I look
yeah.
forward to any and all encounters in the future.
Oh, me too. Me too. And all of you who are listening or watching, those of you who are listening, in case you don't know, I do put video episodes up on YouTube, so you can always find it. There's a Home to Her YouTube channel that's also in the show notes. But just thanks to all of you for showing up as always. It's such a joy to share these conversations with you. And if you like the show, you can subscribe, you can leave it a 5-star review, you can tell all your friends about it, you can do all those things. And until next time, take good care. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Blessings.